Hi, welcome back to lesson 20 on the busy corner. It's been a long time since I made a video because we were building a house. I don't want to do a busy corner on building a house, trust me. But now I finally have some time, and so I can show you some more knitting ideas. This first one I actually got out of a knitting book on scarves using striped yarn, but knitting vertically. So this product I used was the Lion brand Homespun Thick and Quick. It's a 160 yard skein. This color is called Midnight Stripes, and I used 100 yards of it plus 7.5 yards I'll be using, roughly for the fringe. Now, by doing this technique, I was able to make the color scheme go vertically on the scarf rather than across. But in order to do that, you're going to need two different sizes of rods to knit on, because you want to make sure that your casting on row and your casting off row is much looser. Otherwise, the scarf would pucker on the edge. And you can see that the finished size of this, it's about 72 inches long without the fringe, does not pucker. And that's because I used two different sized rods to knit it. So what you need to do, if you want to recreate this same scarf, and this, by the way, took me about 2.5 hours because I used the little mini rods. So you'll have to review my other videos on good ways of manipulating the little mini rod. You could have also used 2 strands if you prefer to do that, or another kind of yarn. So how I made this scarf was I cast on, first of all, I had my slip knot 12 feet from the end of my tail, from the very beginning of the yarn. Make your slip knot 12 feet in so you'll have plenty. I still ended up with a tail that's about 3 feet long, but you want to make sure you have enough. You don't want to get, almost done casting on and realize that you've not left yourself enough yarn. And it's not so critical. I knit this in garter stitch. If I were doing seed stitch, that count would be critical. So if you lose count, you think, did I put on 71 or 72? It doesn't matter because I did this in garter stitch. You're going to knit the whole row as either front stitches or back stitches. So cast on 72 inches onto the 1/2 inch pipe. That's the size. That's 2 11/16 inch around. And then on this side, you're going to have your mini rod, the 3/8 inch one. Cast on here, make front stitches, your first row onto here, and then before you knit over to this side, switch your 1/2 inch out with the other 3/8 inch mini rod. Knit, in my case I knitted 19 rows till I was back on this rod. This was going to be the 19th row. Then I switched this side out to the 1/2 inch so that when I cast off, I was forming my stitches on this pipe and casting off from this side on the left, the larger rod, so my edges didn't pucker. Anyway, that's a really neat way to use vertical stripe, or use striped yarn, but use it in a vertical way. And I hope you can see that because it's kind of neat looking. And then I used, as I said, 7.5 yards of boucle and 7.5 yards of, what is this called? Glamorous from Loops and Threads. I think this is a Michael's brand of yarn. So, and it took, I believe I said 2.5 hours to make it. And that's it for this first part of the video. Okay, so I want to show you another idea for Christmas is coming. I'm going to show you a cute idea for a throw. This would be really cute in a kid's room. And it will also show you another cast on that I think is easier. And this cast on I actually learned from a site called Fiber Arts Boot Camp. They're out of British Columbia, and the woman has alpacas. She does alpaca rescue. And she makes these really amazing knitting needles also that are like crochet hooks. Anyway, it's a neat site, but she does this really great cast on. And by the way, when you read my descriptions under my videos, there's a little box, where all the descriptions are. And at the bottom, it'll say, show more in these blue letters. it'll say show more. If you click on that, you actually get the whole thing. And somebody actually had to show me that a while ago, but I didn't know that before then. So every once in a while somebody will write me and say, well, do you have any patterns? But those patterns are all part of that. So be sure you click on that show more if you didn't know that before. I didn't know that about YouTube. But anyway, so this throw, it's like I say, you could be used for a child's room or, you know, your own. But I had knit this for a charity event, and it just turned out so cute. I was so happy. So what I used was 10 skeins of different colors of Red Heart Super Saver. And you could use 5 skeins and use up, you know, the whole skein. But I bought 10 skeins and combined them so that there's one strand of 10 different colors, and I'll make 2 throws out of it. The one I knitted at the event and gave it to the event, and then I forgot my little needle to weave things in and out, so I'll show you a kind of a cute way. That's why I say kid's room. I'll show you a cute way of dealing with your ends if you don't have your needle with you. So anyway, you know that I always tell you just throw your yarn in a basket and pull it off. Well, when you're working with 10 strands, all kinds of things happen. So you can look down at my basket here, if Joe can shine this down in here. Some of these yarns, most skeins are meant to pull from the center, but you can't always do it. Invariably they tangle. I hate using yarn out of the center, and other knitters say the very same thing. So as it turned out, I ended up with 5 skeins that pulled from the center easily, 3 that I had to wind into balls, and then I said, oh, this is just taking me forever, and I just took 2 and I threw them in the basket. So you can see that I've got these 3. I keep these are really great in your craft room if you're going to knit like this, and that way you can keep things from getting tangled up. And so that way I can work with all 10 strands together and without making too much of a mess. So what I want to show you is this long tail cast on. And the first thing you need to know, you say, well gosh, in this case I'm going to put on 21 stitches for this little throw. So I don't know how much tail I need for my cast on. So that's always a good time just to do a little math. So you just start with, say, you know, I'm going to give myself a yard of yarn right here. Well, that was 24 inches. Let's do, my table's 36. So I'm going to go in a yard, and I'm going to make my slip knot. So take here's your tail on your left, your working yarns around your finger this way. Just cross them, grab the working yarn, pull it through, just like always. So you have your big slip knot. Now you want to make sure that you have all the ends of your tail. So now I'm going to turn this way so Joe can get that way. You can see. So what you're going to do is you're going to put on several stitches and you're going to measure it. So let me just show you the long tail cast on that, again, this woman chose in Fiber Arts Boot Camp. So taking your tail in your left hand, you're going to palm the yarn and put the tail around your thumb, front to back. Now bring it up to your knitting needle. You can bring this up so the slip stitch is up a little closer. So now, and this is the working yarn over here. So let me cross these actually. Alright, so again, take your tail around your thumb, front to back. Put that tail just like that. Just like you normally do for a slingshot. So the yarn that's coming off the slip knot is coming around this way, and you're coming under this. Now, this is your cluster of working yarns. Take your working yarn and work it around the pipe, going underneath and around and over, clockwise. Now, take the loop that's around your thumb and bring it over, and don't make it too tight. Pull it a little bit. So now you have 2 stitches on. Let's show that again. So again, my tail is around my thumb, front to back. It's crossing over here go underneath that cross. Make sure you have your working yarns and make sure you have all of them. Bring it around the pipe. It's basically a clockwise fashion if you could look at it from the end of the pipe. Hold on to that. Bring your tail yarn over and pull on that slightly. Again, you don't want that cast on row to be too tight. Keep the end of your tail underneath your fingers. Go under the loop of yarn that's created. Bring your working yarn around and bring that loop of yarn over. Just like that. And if it seems a little tight after you've pulled on your yarn, just use your fingers to loosen that up somewhat. Now we have, not including the slip stitch, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, we have 5 loops of yarn on here. Now I'm going to take this off because I can see I don't have nearly enough tail. But if you were working with expensive yarn, you wouldn't want more tail than you really need. In this case, you want a little extra tail because I'm going to show you something cute. But the point is, now take this off. Because I know I made 5 stitches and I have this much left. In fact, what I have left is about 19 inches. Well, in fact, with some of the shorter ones, it's 18. Anyway, so take this off. Pull it out. Alright? Now I know I had 18. I started with 36. I had 18 left. So we're just going to do a little math. 36 minus 18. What is that? It's 18 divided by 5. So for each stitch I put on here, I needed 3.6 inches of yarn. Is that right? So to do 21, I'm just going to say 21 times 4. I need 84 inches of yarn before I can make my slip knot. And you never want to do it, you know, just that much. You always want to make extra. I know my table here that I work on all the time is 36 inches. So I'm going to start and I'm going to measure, there's a yard, there's 36. There's 2 yards. And I'm just going to be generous and give myself 3 yards before I make my slip stitch. So that's just a little way you want to kind of calculate rather than putting all your stitches on. Just put a few on and see how much yarn a few stitches took you, and then you'll know how much yarn you need, because it will depend on how thick the yarn is, how big your pipe is. Most of the yarn created for the stitch is coming off your working yarn. And again, I'm going to show that cast on one more time, because I think that's so much easier. It's a little difficult because I have all these strands of yarn here, but you just want to make sure that you have, let's pull off some more yarn here. And again, you're going to need to be careful when you're working with this many strands. Pull it off a little bit at a time. Let it sit in one of your baskets, especially if you have cats. You don't want this stuff like rolling around on your floor. So again, you're going to take the yarn in your left hand, put the working yarn or tail around your thumb, put that loop on your pipe, take your working yarn now, go around the pipe from left to right, take the tail and bring it over, and you've made a stitch. Make sure you don't have it too tight. Make sure every time that you have the yarn around your thumb that you're using the tail yarn to make your loop, pipe that, then use your working yarn and make sure that these are not, that they're straight and not caught up around each other. Go around your pipe from left to right, then bring that loop back over and snug it up just a little bit, and you've made 3 stitches. And you're going to put on 21 stitches. When I finish this throw, I'm going to show you something cute to do at the end. Okay, so yesterday I knit for about an hour and 15 minutes, and so far I've done 26 rows, and I wanted to show you what the progress looks like and give you a couple of tips. Number one, you're doing this in stockinette, and so you can see that the side that's facing away from you on the pipes will be the right side of the fabric, and you can see how that's looking. I love this combination because it looks like a box of Crayola crayons, but the side that's facing you as you knit is going to be the wrong side, or the purl side. And you can see all my lines. This is the 10 pieces of yarn that are coming up to the piece. Now, I moved this one basket closer to me. This is the one, these two skeins of yarn, I'm just pulling it off from the center. So you want to make sure, those are the hardest ones to get the yarn off of. Pull a good hunk before you begin a row and drop it back down to the basket, if that's how you're doing it. Those are the ones I'm pulling the yarn from the center, and those are the balls. So here's a little tip. Now there's 21 stitches on here. These are very fat stitches because each stitch of yarn consists of 10 strands of a number 4 medium weight yarn. So that's pretty well packed. When you walk away from it in the end of a row, you know, your working yarn and that last stitch will always drop down a bit. Therefore, that's pretty loose. So put a little clip on the end of your pipe, or another way to approach it is just to pull your working yarn back and around, just to make sure you don't lose that last stitch. So I'm about to begin again, and this is going to be row 27. And I want to point out that when you're working with a lot of strands like this, you want to make sure that you don't pull off too much at one time. You can pull a little bit more, again, from the skeins that are the most difficult. These will pretty much unroll on their own. And when you make your stitches, you want to make sure, here, let's do this first stitch, because this is always the tricky one. Take off your stitch and make sure you have the whole thing, as I've always shown you. Make sure you have all your working yarns. Reach through, grab the whole set of working yarns, and pipe it. Then underneath, this is the old stitch that's coming around the working yarn. Hold that with your fingers lightly and pull your working yarn to snug that up. And you might find that one or two of those yarns needs a little extra tug, but that will work in. Now, as you're making these stitches, the tendency is, however you make them, whether you pull them through with your thumb and forefinger or your thumb, it's easy to twist this clump, this grouping of yarn. And if you twist that and continue to twist as you're making the stitches, you're going to see that that twist gets transferred down these strands of yarn. And you'll find after a time that this has all twisted together at the bottom, and it's going to get tighter and tighter and tighter. You want to make sure that doesn't happen. So only pull off small amounts of yarn at a time, which you need for several stitches, and be careful as you're forming your stitch and putting it on the pipe that you're not twisting it severely. You see how that wants to twist as you remove it. And if that happens, before it gets bad, you're going to want to just take your cluster, your grouping of yarn, and turn it slightly so that it eliminates the twist before you make your next stitch. And then pipe it. And try to get those as straight as possible. The other thing you want to monitor as you're knitting along is to make sure that none of these yarns, and this is another reason why you don't want to pull off too much yarn at once, these yarns have their own, there's texture to them, so they'll grip each other. You want to make sure that they're smooth and straight. Use your fingers to comb the yarn a little bit slightly before you start your stitches. Otherwise, you might find that as you've been knitting, one of these has made a loop on itself. And that's very easy to overlook when you have all the yarns in your hand. So you just want to make sure that you've kept them straight. And again, if you see a little bit of a twist start, just turn a little bit with your hand. When you hold the group of yarn, make sure you have all your working yarns together. And take off your old stitch, pipe it, So that's the biggest trick when working with multiple strands. And when we come back, I'll show you how to finish the throw. Okay, so here's the throw all finished. It is approximately 29 inches wide and about 55 inches long, and it took about 2 hours and 15 minutes to complete it without doing anything with the ends. Now you can see that I've already finished this end, and all I did was take this is where I cast off, and I wrapped it through one more time, and I braided it, and I'll show you that in a moment. So rather than weaving all these yarns in, you have an attractive tail that I think looks in keeping with the style of the throw. Now just remember, when you do a throw like this, in stockinette stitch, you're going to wind up with what is called the wrong side, because this is the purl side. And stockinette always curls in a bit at the edges. If you don't want that to show, if you don't want to see the purl side of this, you could even finish the back with fleece or a contrasting fabric. And if you do that, I would suggest picking out the fleece first, and then you could match the yarn to it. And I'll put all the colors on my description area, and I'll show you how to do this in a second. In the meantime, I want you to take a look at my yarn remnants. Each of these skeins was 364 yards, according to the label, 7 ounces. But you could see the variation in what I had left. And this red, and I'm not sure if this was the claret or burgundy, I only had 10 yards left. And let me have Joe, if you want to do a quick measure in your craft room, most women's arm span is 5 feet. So if you want to measure something quickly, just go fingertip to fingertip, and you know that's roughly 60 inches or 5 feet. So I know I have 5 yards or 5 feet from end at that. And so I had almost 10 feet left. I actually had to take out a row on the stationary rods because I thought I could squeak by and I didn't. So you can see that these skeins aren't created equal. When you're going to make something like this, just be aware of that. And watch your balls, because you can see I have a considerable amount left of some of these lighter colors. But the red, 10 feet, and this brown, not much more than that. So I didn't measure that actually. So if you want to finish it like I did with the braids on either end, what I would suggest doing is, this is where I cast on. You're not going to need it this long. So cut some of that off. And then just for insurance, I like to take, remember this is where the slip knot is. So there's sort of a knot in there, but I like to make doubly sure that it's not going to pull out. Because theoretically, if you had the end of this, you could keep pulling and you could undo this thing. So you don't really want that to happen. So choose a place where you can wrap it through, and just take your finger and you can wrap it around a stitch one more time. And then all you need to do is push that up, then take your 10 strands and divide it into 3 bundles. And one bundle will have 4 strands of yarn, and just do a regular plaited braid, and you won't have to weave in any ends, and make that braid as long as you want. Then do a simple overhand knot at the base of the braid and trim it. And while I have you here, we'll do one piece on this other scarf. In case you have never put a fringe on before, this was my cast on row, and you can see that that's my tail. And you want each of your fringe pieces, there's going to be, in this case I used 1 piece of the boucle and 1 piece of that charisma yarn. I think that was what it was called. They're each 15 inches long, and just fold it in half so that you have a loop when you fold it in half. And then you can just work that through a stitch. Make sure you're at the bottom of the scarf and not on the side. And you can just use your fingers, hold it on your lap and go in at the end, find a good spot, and take that little loop of long yarn and push it through and open the loop, and then take your tail along with your other end and pull that through the loop, then pull it down carefully, because the boucle will, with the texture it's harder to pull. And I'm going to go ahead and trim this. And you're going to do that with 8 more pieces and just space it along the edge of the scarf. You'll notice that there's 3 pieces in this one end by the time you're done, because it'll look just like this. And so that kind of illustrates some of the things you could do. Now, notice when I picked up that scarf just now, I pulled on that yarn. It's no big deal. Just push it. You know, once you've put your fingers in there, it'll go right back into shape. But anyway, this is what you can do. Two projects you can do for about 2.5 hours. Not very much money. And it illustrates some of the properties in using yarn. Garter stitch is a really nice, that or even seed stitch is a nice stitch to use when you have very highly textured yarn where the stitches don't show. And you want the item to lay flat like this does. And you want it to be reversible. But if you have very plain yarn or yarn without a lot of high texture, I think stockinette is a much prettier stitch because it lets the braid show. And it also makes a denser fabric. But it isn't reversible, and the edge does curl. Whenever you have more knit stitches than purl stitches, you're going to have fabric that curls. So that's why garter stitch is flat, as is the seed stitch. And when you do the scarf, by the way, I noticed as I reviewed these videos, I said I put on 72 inches on my cast on row. That's not right. Use 72 stitches on your cast on row to make this scarf. And one other thing I can mention, you remember we started with big needles or big rods, and then we went to the small and back to the big rod for our cast on and cast off rows. You can do the same thing with a throw. You want to make sure that when you make your cast on row and your cast off row that there's enough stretch in there, otherwise the throw tends to pucker a little bit. So if you have problems with that, you can always do that same principle. You could cast on with a larger rod before you start knitting. And so that's it. If you have any questions, I'm always happy to answer them. Thanks for watching.